Okay, so from a distance, it seriously looks like a battleship just cutting through the ocean. But it's not a warship. Nope. It's actually a ghost city, a whole city made of concrete sitting on a tiny island, and it holds this absolutely incredible and honestly pretty tragic story. This is Hashima Island, and we're about to dive right in. And that brings us to the big question, the real mystery we're trying to solve here. How did over 5,000 people just vanish from what was once the most densely populated place on the entire planet? I mean, seemingly overnight, a thriving city packed to the gills, just empty. To figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock, all the way back to the peak of Japan's Industrial Revolution, and really dig into the complicated legacy it left behind. So let's talk about what the island is like today. Honestly, it's this haunting scene of decay, just a massive concrete ruin getting pounded by the sea and storms. And the craziest part? When you look inside these crumbling apartments, you can still see people's stuff. Like their televisions, bottles, old newspapers. It's all just sitting there, as if everyone just got up one morning, walked out the door, and never, ever came back. It is a perfect time capsule of a world that's just gone.
Right, and that's exactly where it gets its famous nickname, Gun Kanjima. In Japanese, that means Battleship Island. Makes sense, right? It's sitting out there in the East China Sea, not too far from Nagasaki. And, there are about 500 other uninhabited islands in that area, but trust me, none of them have a story quite like this one. So the big question is, how did this place even happen? Why build a whole city on a tiny rock in the middle of the sea? Well, the answer is deep underground. The entire island, this entire city, was built for one reason, and one reason only: to get at the coal. The story really kicks off back in the 1800s. At first, it was just some coal found scattered on the surface. No big deal. But then, by the 1850s, something huge happens. The nearby city of Nagasaki becomes this major international port. And that, right there, is where everything changes. The industrial giant Mitsubishi saw a golden opportunity. In 1890, they bought the entire island and planned to start mining on a scale nobody had ever seen before. And what's so wild is the timing of it all. It was absolutely perfect. The whole world was making this massive shift from sailboats to steamships. And all these new steam-powered vessels coming from Europe and America docking right there in Nagasaki, well, they were hungry for fuel. And Hashima had exactly what they needed: tons and tons of high-quality coal. It basically became the perfect gas station for the entire industrial age.
And the sheer scale of this operation, it's just staggering. I mean, get this. Over its entire history, miners pulled 16.5 million tons of coal from the seabed right under this tiny little island. To give you some perspective on that number, that's enough coal to power all of modern-day India for a whole month. Just incredible.
So all that coal and all that money, it didn't just build a mine. It built a whole society, a really unique one. This is the story of how Hashima transformed into one of the most unusual and definitely one of the most crowded cities the world has ever seen. Okay, so you've got thousands of workers flooding onto this tiny island. Where do you put them all? Mitsubishi had to get creative. So in 1916, they built Japan's very first large-scale reinforced concrete apartment building right here on Hashima. And this wasn't just some apartment block. It was basically a fortress, engineered to survive the absolutely brutal typhoons that would just slam into the island all the time. And the population just kept growing. By 1959, it hit its absolute peak, 5,259 people, all of them crammed onto this tiny little rock that you could literally walk across in just a few minutes. Now, to really wrap your head around what that must have felt like, you've got to look at the population density. And yeah, this chart really puts it into perspective. Just look at those numbers. At its peak, Hashima had a population density of 335 people per acre. Compare that to China today, which is around 84. It's not even close. For a while there, it was one of the most densely populated places ever recorded in all of human history. Just nuts. Now, what's fascinating is this kind of dual world they lived in. Above ground, life was surprisingly normal, even vibrant. It was a totally self-contained city. You had schools, a hospital, a town hall, a movie theater, shops, swimming pools. They even had rooftop gardens. But below ground, that was a completely different story. The miners were working in shafts over a kilometer deep in just brutal conditions. We're talking 45 degrees Celsius heat, that's 113 Fahrenheit, and 95% humidity. A true tale of two cities. So for decades, this crazy vertical city was booming. It was a success story. But then came the 1960s, and the world started to change. And that one single thing the island was built for, coal, well, that became its Achilles heel. The silence was on its way. So, what went wrong? Well, it wasn't just one thing that killed Hashima. It was more like a perfect storm of problems hitting all at once. First, Japan's national energy policy shifted. They moved away from coal towards cheaper oil. Then, global demand for coal just tanked. And on top of all that, the island was getting hammered by typhoons constantly, and the repairs were just ridiculously expensive. The whole operation was losing a ton of money. And when the end came, it came so fast. On January 15th, 1974, Mitsubishi made it official. The mine was closing. And get this, within 3 months, the island was completely empty. Everybody was gone. Just try to imagine that for a second. An entire generation of people had grown up there. This tiny rock was their home. And then, in the span of just a few weeks, they were forced to pack up and leave everything behind. Their houses, their friends, their entire lives. Gone forever. So after that last person left in 1974, Hashima was totally sealed off from the world. For 35 years, nobody was allowed on the island. But its story was far from over. It was about to have a second act, and this new chapter would bring with it a very, very complicated legacy. Then, in 2009, things changed. Parts of the island were finally opened back up for tourists, and its just stunningly eerie vibe immediately captured the world's imagination. But its biggest moment in the spotlight? Oh yeah, that came in 2012, when it became the unforgettable island lair for the villain in the James Bond movie Skyfall. I mean, what a perfect location for that. Okay, so this newfound fame led to a big push to get the island UNESCO World Heritage status. And Japan's argument was, look, this place is a key site from our Meiji Industrial Revolution, a symbol of our modernization. But that's not the whole story. South Korea and China pushed back, and they pushed back hard. They pointed out that during World War II, thousands of their citizens were brought here as forced laborers, and that they suffered and died in those very mines under just horrific conditions. So in the end, a compromise was reached. The site was recognized by UNESCO, but with a crucial condition, that this painful, darker part of its history would also be acknowledged and told. So when you look at Hashima Island today, it's really a monument to two things at once. On one hand, you have this incredible feat of engineering and this tight-knit human community. But on the other, you have a history of exploitation and immense suffering. And that leaves us with a really tough question, one that's worth thinking about. How should we remember places like this? Places that were built on both incredible innovation and terrible pain.